I'm gonna get started. Good. I should say good evening to everybody who's here bright and early for the call, and to the many of you who will be listening to this as a recording in our library of resources for our employer information series. This will be our final one for the school year 2023-2024. Obviously, we end with a big bang. Today, our EIS is in Google. We have Brent Newhouse, who's on the call with us, a Google veteran, and then Shelby Heitner, who should hopefully be joining us soon. With that being said, for the rest of the year, we will have we have three more panel series. Compensation negotiation strategies with Melissa De La Rama and Susie Galliano, and then pursuing a JD and pursuing an MBA in April, and that will conclude us for the year. With that being said, there's my minute, right? So we'll start with Brent Newhouse. He'll give us an introduction, and then we'll go right into it. Like I said, hopefully Shelby Heitner will be here to join us sooner rather than later. So Brent, the floor is yours.
Sure. So I've been at Google for about 4 years. I can give my little life story real quick. When after Harvard Westlake was at school in the Bay Area, I've been in healthcare technology for pretty much my whole career. Um, I actually worked at Google from 2010 to 2012 as my second job out of college, and then left and started a company, did some other things in the healthcare technology space, and then returned to Google about 4 years ago as part of their healthcare division. So I'm pretty familiar with the company and seen it in two pretty different stages, I would say. Like back in 2010, it was, I can't remember exactly, but I don't know, maybe 15 or 20,000 people. And today it's like 150 plus thousand. So huge, huge company. The first time I was here was in a internal strategy and operations role. They call it biz ops. It's like internal consultants. I'd been a consultant as my first gig out of college, so it was kind of a natural fit. And like I said, now I'm in their healthcare division. I lead a team that does kind of the customer facing or traditionally like post sales work for a healthcare product that the research division has been building. It's a kind of a crazy time in Google. A lot of stuff going on. Obviously, this generative AI hype is pretty strong right now. Um, Also been kind of rolling layoffs and things like that. So it's been a definitely, I think folks that have been around for a while or maybe seen the company in a different stage in its life cycle would probably agree. It's definitely some new waters that Google is in these days, but still a really good place to work, I think, all in all. And It's been a good 4 years for me.
Right, you previewed some of the things that we're going to touch on as we go further into our conversation. Shelby, how you doing?
Hi, it's good to see you.
That was Brent's 2 minutes. Your 2 minutes are now.
Oh, great. Hi, my name is Shelby Heitner. I am a talent intelligence analyst at Google. That's a lot of words, but I do a job similar to what Brett did when he first came, which is I'm an internal consultant focusing on labor economics. I got this job. I actually interned at Google while I was still in college in the summer of 2013 and then came on full time the summer after that and have been in my current job since I graduated for around 5.5 years. I agree that the company has changed a lot, but during my time, I've gotten to work on some pretty cool projects. My research supported Google's implementation of a student loan repayment benefit, which was really exciting, as well as hiring a couple hundred people in Kenya and Miami. And so we work a lot in like location strategy, where Google should build, where the talent is, as well as looking at what our competitors are doing in that space. Obviously now AI is very big, but also things like Silicon and other things that support AI are large as well. And I also did a brief stint on the compensation team, which was when everyone was returning to office. They needed more hands on deck for that. And I had 3 months of being the company side of negotiating salaries, which was the most informative experience of my life. I found out, like, especially at big companies, exactly what you have to do, which is something that I thought should be taught in high school, right? Or at least in college. And so something that I like to do is kind of share the wisdom that I got from that time with anyone applying to jobs because it's helpful information.
Great. Thank you so much. As I said, our conversation will go for about a half hour, and then we're going to open it up for what will probably be many questions for you and Brent Shelby. So you know where you went to school. With that being said, let's get after it. And you both alluded to it, so let's start with this one. What are some of the biggest challenges facing Google overall, and then specifically in your department? Either one can go first. There's no set order.
Shelby, go for it. I feel like you're going to have a much bigger picture view of the company than my little world in research.
Yeah, sure. So I do work, I guess what I would say, like on the front lines of hiring and also talent strategy. So I do kind of get a pretty broad view of Google and where it's moving, and also what competitors are doing as well, so other large tech companies. And it seems universally, I'm sure you've seen layoffs are happening, but it's a lot about right sizing the company is the terms that they'll use. And they do a lot of techniques to do that, including return to office. Layoffs is another tool, but also a higher emphasis in learning and development. So having people that already work at companies learn to be able to get new skills to fill new roles. But at the same time, we have almost endless demand for talent in AI. And roles adjacent to that, as well as cloud, are like the two big things I think that Google is betting on now. And so there still is a lot of work, but it's more figuring out where we can find that specific talent is kind of what we're focused on, and seeing what our competitors are doing, because I know everyone's focusing in AI, but it actually looks very different across companies. For example, Facebook, now Meta, is trying to hire people in research capacity to come up with a new project, whereas Microsoft is hiring AI engineers to build AI into their existing products. And so who they're actually hiring looks very different across the board. Google is, I would not call a first mover really anymore. They're kind of a middle of the road. So they like to see what other companies are doing first, at least in terms of hiring and locations. And then they'll kind of make their decision from there. So they're kind of doing something, I would say, in the middle. We're focusing on research and development as well as AI in different spaces of existing products. So yeah, that's pretty much what's top of mind. How about you, Brett?
That's a way more articulate answer than I would have given. So yeah, not much to add other than a lot of AI. Anything AI sells right now, it seems like, in the company. A lot of our projects in research have been pivoted, to how can it, if it's not kind of directly tied to generative AI, like how folks are getting repurposed or asked to join new teams, and all not just to develop the models, but things peripheral to it, do deals to get more data to train the models on, trust and safety, like just, yeah, anything that has to do with generative AI right now is definitely sucking up a lot of the oxygen.
That's interesting. We've got, of course, our Next Gen conference May 2nd, which will be AI focused at HW. So I may be reaching back out to you and Shelby to see what perspective, if any, you can lend. We talked about AI, and of course, we can go. Well, I guess you can incorporate that in the next question, because it's kind of sort of taking over the world. But we talked about challenges. What are some of the trends that are happening at Google, and how do they specifically affect your department? And it's okay if we're going back over old territory with this one.
I can do it really quickly. So my department, again, is a little unique in that we're part of the research division, and we focus on healthcare. And so, as I mentioned, I would say since kind of the Gen AI explosion of last year, there's been a lot of just kind of refocusing of what's everyone working on, and is there a Gen AI angle? And if yes, keep doing it. If no, in many cases, stop doing it and go help this other team with the Gen AI stuff they're working on, or repurpose what you're doing, or do it, but now incorporate generative AI. So that's kind of been our experience. The healthcare division was hit pretty hard by the layoffs. I think Google overall was like 8 or 9%, something like that, high single digit percentage in the RIF. The healthcare organization that I'm a part of was like 20 to 30%. So not all, yeah. When you hear kind of these stories about the layoffs, like some of it is to kind of de-invest in areas and maybe open up new headcount in Gen AI, and so not all departments have kind of fared equally in that, I would say.
Yeah, so I think that something big that's happening now with us is, in addition to the pivot to AI hiring, something that's very concerning that we're seeing is that a lot of companies that have had very strong diversity mandates have completely stopped talking about them. A lot of companies failed to publish their diversity annual reports last year or even publicize them. And there really is this tension that we're seeing with AI hiring, which is a very small group of people that are primarily white men. And also, when we're looking at locations to hire for, that talent tends to be located in places like the Bay Area, which are also whiter and more male in the workforce. And so my team is really trying to make sure that hiring diversely and diversifying our workforce isn't shut out of the conversation with this pivot. And with that is kind of an emphasis on education. So there is not enough talent in the world right now to cover for the amount of open roles there are in AI. And that means educating not only at a college level, but also at a high school level, getting people excited in this type of roles, and especially women and people of color who tend to be underrepresented. So that's something that's hard for us to control when we're just hiring on a day-to-day, but kind of reframing that hiring is something that goes from starting in high school or even middle school to the time when you're interviewing at Google is something that we're focusing on and trying to change the narrative around.
Tails right into our next question, Shelby, and especially I think you would especially be suited for it since you're on the front lines of hiring, right? What are the skills and attributes that you feel are most valued by Google and its employees overall, and then specifically in your divisions?
Yeah, so obviously, when we're talking about AI and technical skills, that's always something that's on the forefront for Google. Specifically, when we're looking at cloud technology as well as AI are the two big ones. But I work in a non-technical role, and I think that that's of interest to a lot of people. Like, how do I get hired in a non-technical role? And for me, it was data literacy. So even if you're not in a tech role at all, having a fluency with data, using softwares like Stata or R. We have our own Google tools, but that was kind of what helped me. I applied randomly online and was picked out of the slush pile basically for my internship. And it was my past experience in research labs and being fluent with data and being able to use that, which was what got me in the door. So that's the big piece of advice I give to people that are interested in non-technical roles is you need some type of technological fluency or at least being able to read data. And that'll really set you apart from other people.
Yeah, from my end, I guess I would say it's a huge company, like 100, 200,000 people, and so many different teams that are doing highly specialized roles. I think there's probably certain tracks where the interview process is pretty standard, and if you're a software engineer or a product manager or a program manager, there's probably you could probably do a search online and find interview questions, and it's going to be pretty common. Again, just to ground this in my experience, since I was joining a healthcare team in kind of a specific customer facing role, my interview process was very unique to that. And that was also my experience when I was on BizOps 10 years ago, that I was joining a team of consultants. Pretty much everyone came from, McKinsey, Bain, BCG, et cetera. Like the interview process there resembled what it would be like at one of those major consultancies. So long way of saying, I think my experience has been that the interviewing and kind of selection process is pretty represented, for the function and part of the company, pretty representative of what it would be elsewhere in industry. Sometimes, at least it used to be, that you would hear like, oh, Google asks these like weird questions to see how smart you are, like how many
I
ping
remember
pong
that.
balls will fit in the 747 or whatever. I heard that one. I have literally never heard that. I've never seen that sort of thing on an interview guide. I think if you did that, it'd be like pretty amateur hour, honestly, to interview someone with a question like that. So I wouldn't waste any time, on like kind of preparing for sort of oddball, like brain teaser type questions. Odds are the interview is going to be very, kind of right down the middle of the fairway for the specific function and industry. One thing I will say is like, there's an emphasis on Googliness, which can mean whatever you kind of mean whatever the interviewer wants it to mean, but should mean that the person is generally like, well-intentioned, good judgment, good person, going to help out others. That's a pretty strong part of the culture, that people tend to help each other out. It's a pretty collegial atmosphere. So, that would be something I think, and I doubt it's unique in any way to Google, but that would be an attribute that I think is good to kind of find a way to bring out.
And kind of piggybacking off of the skilled and attributes question, um, educational background. And Brent, I know you made the point, you've been solid in making the point that it is a huge company, right? Hundreds of over 100,000 employees now. So there are many different departments, and we wholly understand that. But for you and Shelby, I guess, your take on the type of educational background that you've seen, and then also particularly in your department, as far as those who get hired or those who are deemed attractive.
So actually educational background is not really a factor
Okay.
in the interview process for at least for me. I mean, in fact, I remember uh, when I came here and I started hiring, and I was talking to the recruiter, and I told her, I'm like, I screened out a bunch of candidates, and she asked me why, and I said I never heard of any of these companies or these schools. And to me, that was like just a totally normal kind of way of like, yeah, I mean, if like I should have heard of them in the healthcare space or technology or whatnot. And she's like, no, we don't do that here. You got to, look at the nature of the work that they've done in these places, even if you haven't heard of it, even if you haven't heard of the school, which I understand, actually. I mean, it's that I understand the intent, which I'm sure Shelby could speak to more eloquently than I, but, which is not to select on things on dimensions that already have kind of a set of, selection criteria implicitly applied, which may or may not align with Google's broader goals of what it wants its workforce to, how it wants its workforce to be constituted. So that is the way it should work in theory. In practice, how it plays out, it probably depends on the team and whatnot. I will say, just in general, people tend to, I mean, it is still kind of true that people kind of tend to hire folks that have similar backgrounds as them. Like I've observed that actually looking at other roles within Google. So anyway.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I was actually reading a study on LinkedIn for work today, about their like trends in recruiting, and they said that there was, I can't remember the exact number, but like a 15% increase, somewhere between 15 and 30% of jobs without education requirements. So there's definitely a move away from that as a movement like towards equity. But in my job, we were hiring once for the team, and they had our manager required us to put that a candidate needed an MBA, which is kind of hilarious because not a single person on our team had an MBA. And I think that it kind of goes to show that sometimes there is a disconnect between like qualifications and what you have, but and like what they're looking for. But I think the best advice that I gave is like it's often hard to convince someone, say you are a like flight controller and you kind of are like basically in control of like all the flights that come in, you're good at multitasking, you have a lot of different projects going on. That might make you a very good project manager, but it might be harder for you to like get past the first screening round. So I think focusing on skills is where the industry is moving anyway, and in particular with the rise in like AI screening resumes, going through and highlighting the exact words of skills on your resume that are present in the jobs is probably going to be your best bet. I think that that's probably what they would be screening for more than universities. But at the end of the day, like I've looked at the numbers because that's my job, and it is mostly like elite institutions that we hire for. You know, there's a bigger push for more diverse universities, especially HBCUs now. So that's hopefully we're hiring some more. But it kind of, I mean, it's a company with a pretty large data set now. And there's a lot of time, and it's still kind of going to like the top tech schools, which I'm sure you could imagine. So that's still present, but hopefully the industry is kind of moving away from that.
Sure. And
I
you
just
talked about, go ahead, Brent.
Rick, I just remember one little like practical tidbit that may be interesting or relevant for folks that I only learned as a hiring manager, which is when you look at the job postings, there's going to be minimum requirements and then preferred requirements. And the minimum requirements like really are minimum requirements. When I was putting together job descriptions for the first time, I put a bunch of stuff in the minimum requirements because I don't know, they were always, I guess I was a little loosey-goosey with them in the past. And, you know, even if someone didn't have all the minimum requirements, I'd still maybe talk to them or whatnot. And they were pretty firm, the hiring folks, like, no, if it's not, it's got to, if you're not 100% sure that you're ready to screen out everyone that doesn't meet your minimum requirements, then put it in the preferred because I don't know if it's liability or whatnot that they don't want to expose themselves to, but those minimum requirements have to be applied kind of, you know, binary, true, false, and no one will proceed in the process if it's not met. So when you see job postings, I think for that reason, at least my tendency was stick a lot more in the preferred than in the minimum. And it can be hard to know because of that, you know, what is like which of those preferred are actually kind of minimum, but they got, you know, the hiring manager got talked out of putting them in the minimum. Sorry to interrupt. That was just
No,
random little tidbit.
that was valuable for sure. And it actually lends some insight into the next question, right? And Shelby, you kind of sort of teed this off when you talked about that LinkedIn study and the hiring that, you know, doesn't require a bachelor's that firms are going to. What types of training programs are offered at Google, or what should someone look for when it comes to prepping to work there? And again, it's okay if we've already gone over some of this territory.
Yeah, like I said before, data literacy is like the biggest tip that I can give, and being fluent using R or using other statistical modeling softwares, or at least having some type of experience working with data is the top tip I can give for non-technical roles, which seems a little silly. Yeah, but there is this kind of like level that's important for all decision making at Google.
Yeah.
And so I would definitely encourage that. I also think in my specific role, it's very similar to a consulting role, but we're internal consultants. So there's half that's like doing data work, doing research, then also presenting to clients, managing stakeholders, you know, making sure that the people you're giving your work to are using it, tracking how it gets used to show your performance metrics. And so I think it's this kind of like showing that you can handle many projects at once, being able to balance them, showing that, you know, you're able to deliver products, whatever that may be, if it's an event, if it's a project, having that is good experience. And before I worked at Google, I had worked primarily with small companies and internships that I got over the summer, and that weren't as like, I guess you could call it a big deal or as much of a program. And so you don't really need to have a big name, at least when you're applying in college, to be able to get in the door at Google. And I just encourage applying because why not? And, here I am 6 years later. So, yeah.
Right.
That was great. I don't have anything to add. Maybe on the data literacy, just SQL in general. It's a good skill to have, but I think that theme is a really good one.
Good stuff. So data literacy is probably good to have generally in all industries now. And this is coming from your friendly neighborhood works director. So you're hearing it straight from the mouths of two people where a lot of our students and alumni want to be. So make sure you're on top of that. We're at Google. Let's say we're at Google, we get hired. What do our opportunities for advancement look like? And when you were deciding whether to work at Google or not, did you have that information? Did it impact your decision to work there?
I'm curious to hear what you have to say, Brent, because if I heard you left Google and then came back.
Yeah, 10 years later. So I wasn't, there's definitely a pattern of people who leave and go to, say, Facebook and then come back 2 years later at a higher level or something. I came back in a totally different capacity. Advancement really wasn't much of a factor for me, or in the decision. But I mean, I've put a bunch of people up for promotion and kind of been on the committees and seen how it plays out. It's a great company to work for. I think progression up it's not fast, especially now with, I guess it depends on what your definition of fast is, but I would say compared to folks that have been here for a while, there's definitely an effort to kind of make the organization a little less top heavy. So kind of promotions, especially at the higher levels, have been ratcheted back quite a bit in the past year or two. Promotions, I'm sure Google operates very similar to others in terms of like how the process plays out and things that matter, but generally the impact of the work is one of the most important criteria. And sometimes that absolutely can be a function of kind of being on the right work at the right time, or being on work that had, visibility to kind of senior stakeholders. Some of that you can control, some of that you can't. Some of that is, having a supportive manager. But yeah, I think for someone who's really, this is just my candid advice, which Shelby, please disagree, and you may, but for someone who's like early in their career, who really just wants to, challenge themselves and kind of be pushed beyond their level of comfort. I've done the startup thing. I've worked at a big company. Google will give you the big company experience, and I think there's huge positives to that, particularly if you're like a new dad like I am, or need to have kind of work-life balance. But
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's actually number 3, so I
Oh.
deserve less congratulations probably for each one. It's like, oh man, more. But yeah, so for a certain time and place in life, it's been really great for me. I think, again, if I was someone who was like, I need to really push myself and I want to work hard, but make sure that if I'm putting in a ton of hours, like I'm being rewarded with more scope rapidly and more responsibilities. It's a big company and there's a lot of people kind of in line for a relatively small number of promotions. So just, I think, good to come in with that expectation.
Yeah, I think that's totally in line with my experience. I don't know if this is common knowledge. I was not really aware of it before I worked at Google, so it might be worth explaining. But the way that Google and other tech companies do promotions is a leveling system. So the lowest level is level 2, and the highest level is level 10 plus, I think is what they go to. And that's at Google. And the levels are not one-to-one with other companies. At Facebook, if you're level 4 at Google, you might be level 5 at Facebook, and they would track to the same type of place. And Microsoft is like 66, 67, 68. And like somewhere on my computer is like a leveling document to see how they all compare, but it's different, but it's the same. And so there is a strategy that people use, particularly in tech roles, and also when it's a better hiring environment. Brett kind of alluded to this, where they will leave a company and join another big tech company, because really the only time you have to negotiate your salary in a serious way is when you leave and you get a new job. And when you get promoted, you get a bonus, or like, an increase, and you get an annual increase and you get stock. But the salary that you come in on is kind of like your base, and coming in as a new grad is definitely less advantageous. There was also like historically some roles come in at higher levels. I came in at an L, or I guess the lowest level is L3. The lowest levels I came in at L2, but a lot of other new grads came in at L3 just because of the role we were coming in on, not because of any other type of qualifications. So I guess that is worth knowing. I think that was something I was very bothered by for a while because it seemed very unfair. But I have been here for a while. I agree that promotions are kind of becoming less. I've also been on the same team a whole time, and I have been able to see growth within that, but there is a lot of opportunities for switching teams if that's what you're interested in. People from my team in particular have gone into UX research. They've gone into central strategy. Some people have gone into more like recruiting focused roles, which has never really been my motivation, but it was available to people. People have gone into more like banking, into straight consulting. And so it was really a launch pad to kind of go where you want. And that was something that was very attractive to me because I had never really done any type of like labor economic research before. I had the skills, but not in that issue area. And like HR was never something that I was really working towards. It wasn't really my goal. But I saw the skills I was learning here were very transferable to a lot of other industries and a lot of other jobs. And that was something that I thought was really important for me. At an early stage in my career. And I've also enjoyed the work, obviously, because I've been here for a while, and at different points in my life with family health issues and other things as well. Google has been really flexible to support me through that. And through COVID too, because I worked at Google through COVID. So I've seen the company through a lot, and it's also seen me through a lot.
That's interesting. And this is kind of sort of more or less an overall tie into everything that we've been talking about. And that's, of course, organizational culture, right? Company culture. What's the culture of Google? And how is it different from any other organizational culture that you've experienced, if any?
I can compare it to about
You started
consulting
to
and
earlier, yeah.
startup, and the culture at Google is great. And yes, it's changed in the last couple of years since the layoffs. That's, I think, you have to acknowledge that as something that has shifted the culture. But I'd say by and large, the quality of the people at the company is super high. People are good at what they do. They know what they're doing. They're deserve to be what they're doing what they're doing, and they're just good people. Like, pleasant to work with, helpful, and it really makes the day to day a good experience. Like you look forward to coming into work and seeing the other people. It's not. I haven't had an experience at Google where could be different on other teams, but like where it's a really high pressure kind of perform or you're out type situation. Maybe there are pockets like that. I'm sure there's pockets in the company that are like anything, but I still keep in touch with people that I met in my first stint at Google 10 years ago. Some of which were still here when I came back, and so it's been that, I think, is an area that Google still really stands out.
Yeah, I agree. That's definitely been my experience. Though I have heard that it's very team dependent or organization dependent, because it's basically like a bunch of companies that are actually like, it's as if they're autonomous companies. And I've been told that cloud in particular is very intense and has a more like, honestly, a Microsoft culture, because that's where the head of cloud came from. I have only really worked at Google in my post-college life, but I do a lot of interviews with people who have worked other places. And so obviously there's selection bias there, but it seems pretty clear that people are happy with Google. It is, as Brett said, a very like kind, generous, intelligent place to work. But if you are looking for a more startup lifestyle, that's not really at Google. There's a lot of red tape because it's a large organization, and that's just kind of what happens. So things move a little bit slower, but I have worked on very high impact projects. So I think like that's where we see a lot of people sometimes will choose not to come to Google, is when there's an exciting startup that they want to do. But in terms of the big tech companies, I feel pretty confident in saying that like if we're not the best, we're at least like up there, based on what I've heard from other people that work at the peers, which you can attach names to that if you want, but I won't.
Yeah. And another thing you just made me think of, I don't know why, but there's part of the culture is like it's okay to point out like the foibles of the company and the things that could be better. And sometimes to a point that even I've found like a little unprofessional, and I mean, sometimes funny, but other times crosses the line. But there's definitely like a little bit of a kind of irreverent culture where people not in a negative way, but just very transparently talk about like what they like, what they don't like, and there's something like really refreshing about that.
That's literally where I was gonna go, but we're at 6:50, which means we have actually 6:51, which means we have about 10 minutes left. And so I see Ellen, Eric, Elizabeth, and William on the call. Now is the time. If you all have questions for Shelby and Brent, and I'm sure you do, um, have at it, because I had a couple of more and I'm gonna stop in order to see to our audience. Who's up?
Well,
Eric. Eric, go ahead. Go ahead.
hi, I'm Eric, and I was wondering, with like generative AI being like kind of a new thing, and of course like college and university academics taking a while to catch up to new tech and new trends, what is something like undergraduates right now could do to get into the AI space and really have those qualifications that Google's looking for?
That's a really good question. I think that, what would I say? I guess if you're going for like a tech route, understanding machine learning and being able to code, be able to connect. I guess I wouldn't limit AI just to generative AI. It's being used also for like images and a lot of different types. And I would say like kind of specializing in that path is kind of like a surefire way to get a job. So if you're interested in computer science, specializing in AI and machine learning is like great. I think if you do not want to do tech, which is fine, I don't do that. I think being able to use the tools to get your results, I mean, this is my personal opinion, but I think that it's going to become very similar to a new calculator, and it's going to be, you have to be able to ask the right questions to generative AI to get what you want, and also fact check to make sure that it's correct. So being able to generate prompts that will get you what you need and get you accurate information is going to become increasingly important for everyone. Like, you can use AI as like an assistant when you code to make it much easier. My software engineering friends say that it makes their lives easier. But if I were to try to do that, I don't even know what questions I would ask the AI to help me with a software engineering problem. So being able to ask the questions, I guess, and prompt engineering is what you would call it, I think that'll be increasingly important moving forward.
Helpful, thank you.
Elizabeth, William, any questions?
Sure. Brent, you were saying that you had started in consulting, and you talked about the culture at Google. Could you compare it to the culture at Google versus the culture in consulting firms?
Yeah. So I was at McKinsey, so I don't know if this is different depending on the firm, but I would say McKinsey was a lot more intense in terms of just everybody's working longer hours, and kind of, I think everyone felt the pressure a little bit more to deliver and show value and all of that stuff. But within the project team, again, same themes of like really high caliber people who are good at what they do, and again, the types of folks that you stay in touch with later in the career. So yeah, I would there are a lot of parallels in terms of the caliber, but I would say the culture at Google's looser, a little less intense. People have a little bit more time to help each other out. You could call it a little sillier, I guess. It's not, it's a big company, not really silly, but a little more casual.
Yeah, and I'm an internal consultant. I didn't cover my consulting company, but my longtime manager is from BCG. And I love my job because it has a diversity of work that comes from a consulting company where it's project-based. But because I'm an internal consultant, I can choose my own deadline. Like if you're at McKinsey, you're implicitly always competing against other companies for that same project. So you have to do it as fast as possible. But for me, it's kind of you get what you get and you don't get upset because the teams that I'm serving with like my consulting projects can't go anywhere else. And so it's a much more relaxed pace of life. My colleagues that came from management consulting and also HR consulting, we can close our laptops at 5. And I mean, sometimes I have meetings with people in India and Australia, so I can't, but it's much more relaxed, but I still do have the kind of intellectual stimulation of a project-based work that's similar to consulting.
Well, that was fantastic. Are there any more questions from our audience?
Yes, we've got one more question. So
Yeah.
you were talking about how there's a large demand for computer science majors with AI skills. Suppose I'm a computer science major with AI skills. How do I go about, what's the best way to apply to Google? Is it just through the front door, or do I need to somehow connect with another person in Google so that somebody will see my resume? Can you just talk a little bit about that? Like, how do we land that job if we've got those skills?
That is an amazing question. And even if you don't have those skills, I can still help. So I applied online, which is the online pipeline is the most diverse pipeline, but it is the least hired pipeline. The highest percentage of getting hired to Google is through a referral. That's really important. So if I were you and I didn't know anyone at Google, I would go to LinkedIn and find someone in your network who went to Harvard Westlake, who went to your college, and reach out to them and set up a call with them and refer you. Because there's also an incentive for them. I don't get paid because I'm technically in the HR function. It's considered part of my job, but most people will get like a kickback if you were to get hired. And so it's really no skin off their back to do it. You shouldn't be nervous about asking. And I highly recommend searching for that. Then they will submit a form on your behalf and you'll apply through the link that they send you. I think going through schools, they'll have like events at college campuses is also good, but I would say referral is kind of your number one thing. And the other thing that I'll say is for internships as well. So once again, I applied online, but I got there and a close friend of mine who I met through the program went to Williams and he had decided that he wanted to work at Google. And so he reached out to every single Williams grad who worked at Google. And that kind of blew my mind that you could do that. But what I think is interesting is when you're reaching out to people, I'm what I would call like a lower level employee. I'm a great person to reach out to for a referral, or if you need help with an interview process or like negotiating salaries. But what happened to my friend at Williams is the person that got back to him was the highest level person in the room. They were the head of Google Ventures, their whole venture capital thing, and they made a position for him, which is not something that I have the power to do. So if you're looking for something like that, I would reach out to people at higher levels. And if you're looking for help through the process, maybe you've already gotten an initial phone screening interview request, reaching out to people that are generally younger, like myself, I think would be more helpful.
I can't emphasize how valuable that advice you just gave, Shelby. It's almost like you're familiar with HW Works. It's what I do. it's literally what we do, HW alum at companies. And then I always suggest the college that you went to, use that as well. But oftentimes what we're finding is, and I'm not shocking you or Brent, I'm sure, the HW connections seem to be a little stronger than the ones with their colleges. So that's a good way to go about it. It's 6:59. Brent and Shelby are incredible denizens and stewards. They are on the platform. So the question of how do I get in contact with them is very easy. You can do it that way. For our current students, you can message them on the platform. If you want their emails, I'm sure they're more than happy to share them with you. That's Sloan, who's on for my 7 o'clock. Look for some internship advice. So with that being said, if everybody is satisfied, thank you so much, Shelby and Brent. Hopefully we see you on campus soon. Um, Otherwise, thank you everyone tonight. This will be on in the resources section of the platform either by midnight tonight or 8 a.m. tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yep,
I really
thank you.
appreciate
Nice to
it.
meet you, Shelby.
Nice to meet you too.
Okay, take
All right.
care, everybody.
Yeah.
Except for you,
Bye.
Sloan. You can stay.
Hi.
Hello, let me stop my recording here.
What